ago, we discovered our tender, gentle thoughts of the Holy Family portrayed on Christmas greeting cards, some of which the children were talking about this morning, and also found on the ornaments on our Christmas trees and the nativity sets we unpacked for our churchyards and our home tables, may not represent Jesus and his family as the Gospels actually describe them. Now, just days before Christmas, after these weeks of preparing to welcome Jesus the Christ child, a child whom we claim changes the world, a child whom we claim changes our lives, the writer of Matthew poses these questions. Who is this child? And whose child is this? The question, whose child is this, may actually have been asked many times among Jesus' ancestors down through the years. As we learned, the author of Matthew thought it important for us to know Jesus' family background right from the start. Verse 1, first sentence, this is the family record of Jesus the Christ. For this author, at least, who Jesus is because of who his ancestors were. For those of you who were not here 2 weeks ago, if the Matthew genealogy is examined carefully, we talked about, we find Jesus' ancestral heritage is full of deception, incest, prostitution, seduction, adultery, rape, and murder. The author of Matthew lists men, including very high-ranking men, who are of questionable character and practice, who, though honored for their wonderful deeds in the public arena, use their power in their private lives and sometimes in their not-so-private lives to take advantage of others in order to get what they want. Bullies, who use abuse and violence to satisfy their whims and fancies and fantasies, often overpowering and oppressing those of lower social standing. Now, in a society and time when it was customary to trace one's lineage through male descendants, we also find 4 women on the list of Jesus' ancestors. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba, each one of them of questionable social or ethnic standing, at least from the perspective of the dominant culture, or women of ill repute, or women looked down upon because of the things men had done to them. Some of these women have children that we might at one time have called illegitimate, children from adulterous relationships, children from incestuous relationships, children conceived during the violence of rape. By highlighting these 4 women, outsiders looked down upon because of their circumstances or lifestyles or choices, women who have been used by powerful men for their own desires. By listing these men, powerful men of social standing and of questionable character and practice, men who will do almost anything to get what they want and protect their public honor, the author of Matthew is setting the stage to tell his version of the story surrounding Jesus' birth. Jesus, identified clearly by Matthew as the Messiah, comes from a flawed family line, a seriously flawed family line. And as the story moves forward, the family patterns appear to be playing out right before our eyes. The way the story is told in the Matthew account, there is much more interest in the events leading up to the birth than in the actual birth itself or the events following soon after. Basically, we are told about the actual birth is that Mary is pregnant, has a baby, a son, and the baby boy is named Jesus. That's pretty much the birth story in Matthew. The focal point, the pivotal point in the story is Joseph, not Mary. Joseph and Mary are engaged, but they are not living together, and Mary becomes pregnant. A young girl, probably not knowing how this has happened, and probably afraid of what will happen next. Mary's pregnancy calls into question whether she's a legitimate wife for Joseph, to whom she is engaged, and who has exclusive marital rights with her. As the author of Matthew tells the story, we remember what has happened in the past in this family. The illicit sexual relationships, the betrayals and deceptions, the violence and abuse of power. And the question of adultery or rape hangs heavy in the air as the story unfolds. For Mary, the situation is dire, indeed dangerous, potentially having disastrous results. Mary, not only a woman, but a very young woman at that, a girl really, and probably poor also, has no power in her societal context. Pregnant Mary is left solely at the mercy of others. Once again, the issue of legitimacy and scandal are brought to the fore just as they have woven their way through this family's history down through the decades. Not only does Joseph have the right by law to reject Mary, to whom he's engaged, refusing to marry her, but he actually can have Mary put to death, probably by stoning at the hands of a raging mob. The question of whether or not Jesus will even be born hangs in the balance. For Mary, pregnant with this child, could be stoned to death before the Christ child ever appears on the scene. Well, in the writings of Luke, Mary is front and center. In Matthew's Christmas story, Joseph is cast in the pivotal role. By the customs of the day and time, it is Joseph who has the power of decision here. As an engaged couple, it is possible they, Joseph and Mary, could be pregnant. Even though they were not married, this would be tolerated in Joseph's and Mary's societal time and place. But Joseph has no reason to believe the child is his. In this small town, if he goes ahead with the marriage to this young woman, somebody will know who the biological father is. And somebody will tell somebody who will tell somebody else, and on it will go until everyone knows, leaving Joseph humiliated, possibly the laughing stock of the village with his honor destroyed. Now Joseph, who's described as a righteous and upright man, has the power of decision in this situation, and Joseph has an important decision to make. Mary is at his mercy, with no say in the outcome. In his compassion, Joseph is unwilling to disgrace Mary and makes choices hoping to prevent her public humiliation and ultimately her death because of this apparent scandal. He does, however, decide to end the relationship between himself and Mary, which will free him to move forward with his life. Joseph's decision to sort of divorce Mary quietly, hoping to avoid exposing her to public disgrace, is probably unrealistic in this small village where they live. Everyone will be talking, or perhaps whispering, about this situation, likely leaving Mary and the child that is on the way defenseless, outcast, ridiculed, and without resources necessary for their survival. The question of whether or not Jesus will even be born still hangs in the balance. And if he is born, does he even have a chance to live to adulthood? Because as a human baby, he will need at least some basic resources just to stay alive. Nevertheless, Joseph is clear in his intention. When suddenly an angel of God appears not to Mary in this rendering of the story, but to Joseph in a dream. God's message to Joseph is clear. Do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Marry her. God is involved in this pregnancy. Mary is going to have a son. When he is born, you are to name this baby boy Jesus. And this special